First of all, thank you to the participants, to the panelists. We have a distinguished group with participants from Brazil, Salvador, Peru, Uruguay as well. And I think I'm missing someone. I said Brazil. The idea of this forum is to have a space to talk openly about the challenges and the achievements that we've had in facing this energy transition in the region. The countries are going to present their perspectives on the topic, on the framework of their own realities and resources, but at the same time highlighting common elements that can be shared and replicated in the whole region. The idea is to generate an environment that allows us to learn, grow, and generate new bonds that can help us grow as professionals. I wanted to start by reminding you of why we're here. We are here not just because it is our job and we're getting paid, which is not bad, but there is a much greater need. We know that in 1972, as mentioned by Dr. Enrique Ingles yesterday, we started to have awareness of the impact of human beings in the world's situation. It began in 1972 with the environment, and 20 years afterwards with the impact of climate change and the incidents that we have on it. So nowadays, 30 years later, we are living that climate change. It's not a theory anymore. And so we know that the energy segment is this segment that is one of the ones that has the most impact on climate change with greenhouse gases. And we know that energy in general is responsible for 75% of emissions, and the electricity sector in particular and heat generation is in charge of more than 5% of the emissions. So we have a legacy which is to try to improve conditions and mitigate the effects of climate change. So with that, the program of Get Transformed with I Represent is a global program that supports countries in facing this challenge of the energy transition through four pillars, which are energy planning, the market design, and regulation, which is why we're here, and the operation of systems in order to incorporate more renewables. So with that, I would like to welcome you. We have Mariana Alvarez from the big family of Get Transformed, from the group of Argentina. And before that, we will have some words from Luis Jesus from the Association of the Ibero-American Association, of regulations. So Luis Jesus Sanchez Tembleque, he can't be here in person, so he will be joining us online. Go ahead, Luis Jesus. Good morning, everyone. Thank you very much, Antonia. And my apologies for not being able to be present in this meeting, this very interesting meeting. As you know, I work in the Spanish Regulation Agency. I am Secretary of the Ibero-American Association of Regulatory Entities for Energy. IANA was constituted in Buenos Aires in the year 2000. And now we have 25 institutions in ARIAE, which belong to Ibero-American countries. It is a forum for communication between specialists and professionals of the entities that integrated, with the aim of facilitating exchange of regulatory experiences, to promote regulations, to foster the training of personnel that works in these institutions as well. This day is very interesting because I should say that the equity market is a global market where investors bet on projects, whether they are energy projects or not, that allow them to have an adequate return that has to be compatible with the risk that they're going to assume. And there is a competition between projects and the countries that present those projects. So it is important for a country to have strong regulatory institutions that are independent, specialized, and to have good regulations. But what are good regulations? Well, they're the ones that try to achieve the objectives of energy policies, protecting at the same time the consumer. So to try to achieve its objectives and also to protect investors, to have a return that is adequate but not abusive. So it has to be objective, transparent, non-discriminatory, but at the same time it has to be regulation that is flexible so that it is not an obstacle for development of new technologies and for those technologies to be able to be integrated into the energy systems. This forum of regulators is a great opportunity to talk about experiences and show them and show these important experiences that have been developed in these countries in these years. So success to you and thank you. Thank you very much, Luis Jesus. It's been a pleasure listening to you. We also have some words by Elena Escobar. She's a senior specialist in energy at the IDB. She's in Lima. Unfortunately, she also wasn't able to be here in person, so let's continue with some brief words by Lina, and then we'll continue with the panel. Is Lina online? Lina, we are waiting for you to turn on your camera and microphone. Okay, so let's leave that for later. And we will now have the panel. So with that, I invite Mariana Alvarez, Director of Energy Markets and part of the extended family of Get Transform in the world. Oh, we have Lina now, apparently. We see your name on screen, Lina, but we don't see any image or hear you. So, no? Right, I'm being told it's an issue on her side. So, Lina, if you agree, we'll move on with the panel and we'll leave that for later. So with that, I welcome Mariana. Hello, good morning, everyone, all the participants, and thank you very much for Get Transform for inviting me. Something that is very important is that in the panel we're going to have these cards. I'm going to have one here, and my colleague Daniel is going to have one at the back. So yellow means you have 2 minutes to finish, and red means you have to finish as fast as possible. I'm not included, I think. No, I'm not showing you the red card. Thank you very much for inviting us to participate and moderate this event. I'm going to introduce the panelists that are going to show the progress in each of their countries in this process of energy transition. And afterwards, we will open up the floor for conversations. So we have Silvana Romero. Silvana Romero is president of the URSEA, the regulation entity of water and energy of Uruguay. She worked more than 30 years in UTE previously, so she has a lot of experience in the electricity sector of Uruguay and of Latin America. She is a chemical engineer and has a postgraduate degree in marketing and a specialization in management of complex organizations. I'm also going to invite Juan José Rojas Baltazar. Juan José is a general manager of the regulating entity of gas and mining of Peru. He is a general manager of that organization. He has more than 20 years of experience in the sector of energy and mining and has had different positions of management in private and public businesses. He is an electrical engineer. Ligia Ventura. Ligia is a legal counsel of CIGED, which is the General Superintendence of Electricity and Telecommunications of El Salvador. She has more than 18 years of experience in regulations of the electricity sector and telecommunications. She is a lawyer and has a master's degree in economics and also in law. And finally, we're going to invite Agnes Acosta. Agnes is director of ANER, the regulator of electrical energy of Brazil. She used to work in the Ministry of Mines and Energy of the country in topics of innovation and modernization of the electricity sector and in energy transition. She is an economist and has a master's in energy. So welcome, all of you. Silvana, as host or representative of the hosting country, I don't know if you want to maybe begin by telling us about the first experience of energy transition of Uruguay. Well, good morning, everyone. For me, it is an honor, and I want to thank the organizers of this 8th week of energy for inviting me to participate in this panel with these distinguished regulators of our continent. This is without a doubt an opportunity that will be very enriching and allow us to see how we want to move forward with the energy transition, whether it's local, regional, global, in light of the new technological advances and the current geopolitical situation. First of all, I'm going to tell you briefly about 20 years of work in 5 minutes, so you'll understand that this is a very complicated job. But we'll tell you about how we have the first energy transition and tell you about the best practices that allowed us to define regulations that led to results that allow Uruguay to be placed as one of the leading countries in the world, not just in the continent, but in the world regarding wind energy. And we are going to also talk about the challenges that we are facing nowadays, facing the second energy transition. So a key aspect that I should mention to begin is that the definition of energy policies of our country for 2005 to 2030 was defined based on an agreement between all the political parties that had a parliamentary representation at the time. There was a political agreement that allowed us to define this energy policy, and this was a very solid framework as a starting point in the energy development of our country. I should also highlight the coordinated effort of public institutions and private institutions, as well as the existence of fiscal benefits that, in addition to the institutional stability and the investment degree of our country, allowed foreign investors to bring in their capital and invest in renewable energy projects. It is also important to highlight that our country had infrastructure conditions that were very favorable, since the transmission system for electricity, both in transmission and distribution, is very robust. There is a good capability of interconnection with our neighboring countries, so Argentina and Brazil. We are completely interconnected, and we have big hydroelectrical dams that allow us to have this. The framework allowed us for a design of a wholesale market for energy that allowed us to have investments of public and private sectors in the activities of generation. The guarantee of free access to the grid, both for generators and big consumers, maintaining activities of transmission and distribution in the electricity company that has the monopoly in the sense. Now, the initial regulation was initially centered on hydraulic energy and thermal energy, which was what was available at the beginning of the new millennia. Now, the incorporation of non-conventional renewable energies has substantially increased the capability of meeting the demand and being able to represent 100% of the energy that has been dispatched. So there are days where the 100% of the energy is provided through renewable sources. And given that these sources of energy are intermittent, it was necessary to introduce modifications that contemplated the aspects of power and also of supply. We are now also working on determining the technical fee for electricity. So instead of having a cost-based fee, have a technical fee. This will allow us to make more transparent what are the real costs and what are subsidies, which of course are necessary, establishing criteria to improve efficiency both in generation activities and in network activities. The key is to guarantee the sustainability, the economical sustainability of the electricity company, as well as the environmental sustainability of our country. In that sense, the regulator plays a key role in the framework of safety and sustainability, both economical and environmental, as I was saying, as well as in user defense, because we know that it is used both in homes and in very complex industrial processes. We know that the energy industry is really evolving with the need of decarbonizing the grid according to what was established in the Paris Convention. It is also undeniable to mention the technological progress, whether it's IT, communications, control, which are permanent changes in the management of the energy resources. And at the time, since more than 2 years ago, the energy crisis at a global level has been marked by the instability of prices of fossil fuels. So in this current context, our country has set new challenges related to efficiency, mobility, and the introduction of green hydrogen as a new energy vector. The immediate challenge implies moving forward towards a regulation that is innovative, flexible, adaptable to technological changes. I'm reading a bit fast because I realize that I already have a yellow card being shown to me, and probably the red card will be coming soon. So eliminating barriers and trying to foster investments in renewables so that we can guarantee benefits for the whole population, which in the end are the ones who will receive the benefits and the objective of that. And so there is collaboration between the public and private sector, an adequate reflection of the non-conventional renewable energies and emerging technologies, considering capability and storage, also new systems of prices and loans, guaranteeing access to the transmission grid, promoting decentralization, fostering regional integration, and we are all present here coordinating markets and operators, and also the continuous integration of new technologies that are focused on cybersecurity and data privacy. So I don't want to speak too much, so thank you everyone for being here, for listening to this very important topic and these times that we are living in, and fundamentally for the future of our civilization, our planet, which is what we will leave to our children and grandchildren for those of us who are blessed enough to have them. So thank you. Thank you, Silvana. Juan Jose is going to tell us about the advances of renewable energy in Peru and the challenges. Good morning, everyone. So hello from Peru. I'm very pleased to be beside these very distinguished ladies. I come from the I was just in the operator's presentation, and there's this thing about the regulations not being understood, and I think that there's been a transition. Now I am on the side of the regulators, and the truth is that we do understand them, and we're working for that in Peru. I wanted to begin by telling you a bit about the transition. We have to look at it from a general viewpoint, and when we see this general perspective, we see that in the world we have an important composition of energy that comes from oil with 37%, and just one part of that is what is being consumed in the electricity sector, which is what we're talking about today. We, in Peru, about 50 years ago, had a component of 79% of oil consumption. Now we have 41%. So in terms of percentages, we have improved, but also our general consumption went from 0.2 exajoules to 6 times more, so it is bigger now. Peru has renewables. We had 94% renewables in our mix before. Now we have 55%, and 5% is already a component of wind and photovoltaic. Briefly, there will be new operations of approximately double this renewables. For what we had to have better conditions, and we have included a position in order to be able to have this income of energy to Peru, and this is something that we're all paying for. And so if necessary, we will continue to try to have better policies in this sense. And what happens is that it's barely non-existent in Peru. But it is important to generate better conditions for investments to come to Peru, so to eliminate barriers. Of course, we need to provide conditions such as fostering, commercializing power and energy in separate ways. We have to make these energies reach the areas where they have to be, because we've seen that an important issue is interconnection. We can have initiatives, for example, in Peru, we have that in the south, but if there isn't a way to be able to take it to where we have the demand, I think that it's not going to be efficient economically. In Peru, we are also opening up the efficient use, and we are also generating, since September this year, another period for the residential use. We have a fee that we have called 25I, because it's still applied to residential clients, that from 11 p.m. to 8 a.m. we have a certain fee, a base fee, and then in the morning it's a different fee, and afterwards there's another one at night. And so that allows users to have better opportunities, and this will surely be expanded as well in the future to clients of a higher consumption. Thank you very much. Thank you, Juan José. Ligia, from the regulatory entity of Salvador, is going to tell us about the challenges and progress. Thank you very much. Good morning, everyone. I thank you for the invitation. So GIZ and Get Transform for having me here talking with you. I'm first going to talk about some of the things that have been done by El Salvador in terms of public service, electricity power public service. It was born with the law creation of the Superintendents of Energy and Telecommunications in 1996. The superintendents, as part of that process of privatization of the public service, electrical service, at the same time that year, the specific regulations for transmission and distribution and commercialization and distribution of the public service of electricity, they are encompassed in that same attempt. So with that effort of the state no longer being a direct first provider of the service and becoming a supervisor of the correct functioning of the market, it continued to move forward with the incorporation of regulations that lead to the use of renewable energy sources. And a decade after, we established the law of tax incentives for renewables that are produced by biomass, hydroelectrical, solar, wind, etc. Along those lines, those same lines, and with the fact that it is a small country and doesn't have that many resources, in the year 2011, there was also an attempt to have a reform, which was promoted by conversations had with the private sector, academia, and the rest of the participants of the market. In 2011, there were new reforms made to that law so that there are incentives for greater foreign and national investments, and also to have a larger broadening of the electricity grid. There's also afterward an implementation of regulations for users that produce renewables in terms of self-supply, and this was quite fruitful because we can talk about 1,089 plants that were installed. With the government administration, we also tried to follow the same line of use of this transition, energy transition, with renewables. And for in 2021, we began to have the law of incentives for the import of electrical vehicles. Lots of the reasons of the General Superintendents of Electricity and Telecommunications are that they want to modernize. So this is instructed by the presidency, with the introduction of new technologies in the different economical and electricity sectors. And so formally, we have a process of public consultation for the regulations that are going to be implemented, that talk about recharging of electric vehicles. And there would also be a modification of the Legal Incentives Act in order to introduce new technologies, and so always taking into consideration this generation of electricity through renewable sources. And this is one of the great challenges, because we are also reviewing the law of energy efficiency and also systems of energy storage in order to have a more efficient use of resources. Thank you. Good morning, everyone. Thank you for the invitation. In general, I speak very fast in Portuguese, but I don't think I'll be able to in Spanish, so I'm going to speak a bit slower. I worked for many years with public policies for energy in Brazil since December as a regulator. And in Brazil, the functions of the regulators and public policies makers are quite separated, but my experience in the ministry helped me change the mentality of the regulatory agency so that we can internalize the logic or the thinking about climate change and energy transition in the activities of the regulators. Because ANEL did many things, like regulation for storage, regulation for recharging electric vehicles, lots of regulations on access to the transmission system, and with the variability of load and generation from renewable sources, non-conventional sources. But these were topics that were talked about in very isolated ways, and they weren't taking into account the role that this type of regulation has in the strategy of a country regarding energy transition. And so the first thing that I've tried to bring to the agency is this way of seeing their work and how that affects what the country is trying to do. Regarding Brazil, what is important to mention is that nowadays we have around 230 gigawatts of installed capacity in the electricity sector. Hydroelectricity is still something that is preponderant with around 65% of the capacity, but we have a lot of wind energy, around 12%, solar as well, 14%, I think, and with a distributed generation that has grown a lot. So one of the challenges for regulation and for operation of the system is how to encompass all the decisions, all the decentralized decisions that we have nowadays, and how to encompass that with the users who can be empowered to make their own decisions. So there's a lot of discussion in the country with the ministry, the Congress, about the sector reforms, how to modernize laws and regulations in order to encompass new technologies and all the possibilities of behavior of users and all the agents as well. Because in Brazil, we have two environments for hiring, which are regulated environments where you have all the residential consumers, so most of the commercial consumers, and then we have a free hiring for big consumers, but that environment is growing very fast, and with that we need to deal with all the contracts that stay there. And we have to make viable lots of different projects of renewable energies that have maybe longer time frames. And so for regulators, this opening of the market is really challenging because we calculate the fees in a daily way, and so we have less and less, fewer people paying for those contracts that are part of our diversification of our grid. So how do we continue to be successful in diversifying, having clean technologies, but how do we place the cost? And that is one of the main challenges for regulators in Brazil. Thank you. Well, so taking the last thing that Agnes was telling us about, in our job, we work a lot with fee revisions, with regulators, sometimes with distribution companies as well. In particular, in regulators in the Americas, there's no desire to increase fees, of course, because it affects the competition of the economies. There's little availability for payment, and due to different social and economical issues that we have in Latin America. So in this framework, how can we put this in the context of facing energy transition? And so distribution companies will have to make an effort to integrate renewables, to digitalize and then automatize their grids, to offer alternatives for users to be able to manage their demand in a better way, to integrate this in their systems. So how can we make these two situations compatible? So the great investments that are going to be faced by the operators in general terms and the distribution companies, which in Latin America are still sort of starting out in terms of energy transition. And we have these difficulties of increasing the electricity fees. I think that that is a great question because in Brazil we have lots of costs within the fee for electricity. So the first thing, the first step is that it's important for the regulatory agency to have the information and disseminate it correctly to society of what they are paying when they pay fees. In ANEL, we have a platform on the site of ANEL that is called subsidiometer, so like a subsidy calculator, which sort of shows what is the subsidy. And so that's how we make society think about things that we can remove from the fee in order to create space for other things that are important. So we are now at that moment in Brazil. And for you to have an idea, the residential fee, the average fee in the country is 728 reales per megawatt hour. If we take a look at the cost of the distribution networks, it's not even 20%, I think. So 24% of distribution. Energy itself, it's only 34%. Transmission is 6%. 20% are taxes, and 16% are charges for public policies, and even discounts for the distribution and transmission system for projects of renewable energies. And so that is the discussion that we need to have with society. And we have sort of a discounts for distributed energy. And this is also going to be talked about in Congress for hydrogen. So in the end, it all adds up. And we have to show this because we can't just decide. We say that the fee is like a recipe. If the ingredients are not good, the result is not good. It can't be. So the work that we're carrying out in Brazil is this one. In El Salvador, they're trying to change the tariff, the fee to be a technical fee. In Brazil, we already have that since many years ago, and what we have observed is that in the last 15 years, the part of the fee that is related to costs of distribution is the only part that hasn't grown above inflation. And so it is a regulation that has worked, even if we have to add more investment in the grids. And so this is something that we have to do that is very technical, but we have to work in convincing society of the fact that some things have to change because people are not able to pay. And so with that, we will be able to increase the technical things. It's very technical, but it affects people. Yes, I'm sure that technological innovation will also allow, and I think that it's something that is pending in many countries of Latin America, to have subsidy plans that are more focused. Some decades ago, perhaps it was too complicated and costly, and nowadays perhaps it's simpler to do that. Another question is that I'm thinking about, since we have 4 regulators from different countries, very prestigious regulators, and whom I know quite well, likely. How can we foster cooperation in this huge challenge that you have ahead of you of this process of energy transition? How can you collaborate among yourselves? How can you share experiences on common points? Whoever wants to answer. Without a doubt, this type of event is a great kickstart for collaboration and cooperation. Not long ago, in August, we had they had in Peru, where we were really well received, the World Forum of Energy Regulators, and there we had the opportunity of listening and talking. And this week, so last Friday, a delegation from Honduras got in touch with us to have a meeting, and we are already setting the base for an interinstitutional agreement between Orsea and CRED from Honduras in order to be able to have exchanges of experiences and have internships both there and here to get to know other realities. And it's crazy to see how a specific encounter, a meeting, can really unleash this sort of experiences. And I think that also the creation of networks and associations regionally, like Jesus said, they've been working for many years, but growing and relating to each other, creating bonds, not just in Latin America, but also with the other continents where there's very interesting experiences to share. That's great. And another aspect is the analysis or study of funds and financing regionally that can favor the development of regulations and, of course, investment in clean technologies. And another aspect as well, when we talk about coordination, there's so many things that we could coordinate, but harmonizing regulations between the different countries that favor the energy exchange, I think that that is a very interesting challenge, and with lots of opportunities that come up fundamentally sourcing from the different initiatives that we have, from the ones that have the responsibility of leading the regulators. The first step, the person who gets the first step probably won't be able to take the second one. So this is a challenge that we are very interested in. Yes, that's very interesting. Without a doubt, these events are great for regulators, operators, and for us, consultants as well. So again, thank you very much. Going back to the topic of subsidies, maybe not so much subsidies for electricity fees, but with the coming of renewables in the world and in Latin America, this has had an important role in the growth of renewable energies, and it will certainly continue to have an important role when going through this process of energy transition. The question is, and perhaps taking the experience of what has happened in some European countries that are a bit quite ahead in these topics. So up to which point should we provide subsidies? When should we stop because it's no longer of use? I can say that it's one thing to provide subsidies with public resources, and it's another thing to provide subsidies with the fees. I think that public subsidies are very legitimate, of course, with transparency. But this is part of an industrial policy, and it has a logic of industrialization in the country. We debate about that in the region, but in the fee, I think that it's very delicate because people don't see it. It's very difficult to know if it's efficient and if they are being properly used. But we have experiences of changes in laws, for example, for the energy transition. Something that I think is very important to think about as regulators is access to remote regions, and how we're able to do that in a more efficient way with cleaner technologies, with microgrids. All of that is very expensive, and so we need subsidies. But it is important for subsidies to be neutral technologically so that we don't finance fuels or other things, but solutions that provide services for consumers. And so that's what we're working on as well, defending neutral technology, because technology evolves quite a bit. Thank you very much. And in Peru, Juan Jose, can you tell us about the key aspects of energy transition that you're working on? Well, we think that there has to be an energy transition that is responsible, and for that we need to bet on renewable energies. We are in general renewable, but we can go beyond that. We have natural gas, yes, for how many years? Probably 30 years. So afterwards, we don't know. We have to prepare today, and electricity projects need their time, and if we don't start now, we will probably have an issue later. And so we have to emphasize the hydro energy, which is present in Peru, but we can't leave aside the non-conventional or renewable energies, and for that we need to have to make it easy for it to diminish obstacles. And if we have this in the market, we're going to have a leverage and fees that are reduced. If I want to give my children milk of good quality, I have to make sure that I give good grass to the cows. So I have to provide the best conditions for investors to come in and be sure that things are going to work out. So the capital is going to go where it can have a better return. And so we have to open up the market for these investments, and that's one of the ways. And the other thing is something that we were talking about, the subsidies. We have incorporated a way to open up the doors for non-conventional renewables, and they weren't able to come in on their own. And another of the ways is also to make it more efficient. When we're talking about renewables, what we also have to talk about having a more efficient management of demand. In Asia, they have maximums for the consumption of electricity, which doesn't mean a maximum or obstacle for economic growth. What they're looking to do is to produce more with the same amount of energy. So it happens quite a bit. In Peru, we have a direction of efficiency, which has worked a lot with the equipment identification, and we already know which are the most efficient ones. But we are also working on transferring hydrocarbon to the consumption of electricity, especially in remote areas where it's very difficult to get gas over there, also because of safety issues. And so with electrons, we can do that, but for that, we need to have competitive rates. Otherwise, it's impossible to substitute that. And these competitive fees and rates, if necessary, will maybe have to have a subsidy mechanism. In Peru, we have different things. We have a cross-subsidy that we call the social fund of electricity compensation, but we have other types of subsidies as well, as is the compensation system of the residential fee, which is sort of a single national fee, because by nature the most remote regions have a fee that is like triple of the one of urban areas, and this is not well understood. And so we need to try for systems to be sustainable from the economic standpoint, from the social standpoint, and from the environmental standpoint as well. And in the social aspect, we have a law of prior consultation, which has actually stopped some of the investments that we have in transmission. And recently, there was a stop for 90 megawatts for a small place, and this wouldn't have happened if we had had the investments when needed. There was a delay, and we had an issue with that. Why? Because there was a prior consultation that stopped this, and so we have to have clear rules. And this also happens because of an institutional issue. The government has to have clear laws, thinking not as a government, but not just for that government, but in the long term. In that case, I think that all stakeholders will be able to participate in the most efficient way. Do we have time? Thank you. Another thing that maybe we have not talked too much about, and which is relevant in the midterm and long term, perhaps with this delay of investments, and and increase the fees to modernize networks. It has to do with offering clearer signals to the users of the electricity sector in order to manage their demand. So electromobility fees that we see are appearing in the different countries, or different fees based on different times of day for homes that can maybe change their consumption to a different moment of the day. So can you tell us a bit about the fee structures and what is the agenda for modernizing those structures in this sense? So to be able to have users have a better response to demand or participate in a better way in the electricity sector. So in the case of El Salvador, we have an entity through which we have the implementation of new regulations or modifications in cases where the institution needs it. The institution has systematized the implementation at the government level. It is an entity that is decentralized, subject to the presidency, which began in 2019 in a very active way. And with this administration, it has been introduced with the corresponding technical teams of the Energy Directorate and the superintendents. It is now allowed to make the corresponding changes with the participation of all the involved stakeholders, so operators, commercializers, system generators. So the fees are not in the immediate agenda, but we have an agenda that can be updated in a quarterly basis so that it has the most benefits with the least costs, both for end users and for it to be balanced with the returns for the investments. So we have this agenda that we work on constantly in Brazil. We have two-part fees for great consumer, for big consumers. We can plan the growth of the grid and sort of separate the grid and energy itself. We don't have it yet for smaller consumers, but it's something that we are trying to do and debate with society because the process is quite has a lot of participation. But there is something else, another way of working that we began in ANEL, which is the regulatory sandboxes, to try to find solutions in smaller spaces within an area. Here in Brazil, we have 55 areas for distribution of energy and 50 smaller ones. And so we can have a new methodology of fees. We don't have prepay in Brazil. We're going to have a sandbox now for that, to check the results and then see and think if we're going to generalize it in terms of fees for the whole country. So I know that UTE is the one that has the electrical fees in Uruguay, but I just wanted to mention that it's quite modern in that sense. It has hourly fees for residential users, and with that is really targeted towards demand. And so I think that it's an experience that it's really worth sharing in that sense. I wanted to ask Regarding regulations, there are several challenges at the regional level, starting with integration. In the previous panel, we talked about the fact that if we take a look at the regional integration in commerce in Latin America, it's very low, especially we have an integration of 0.3%, if I'm not mistaken. So what can be done from the regulatory standpoint to promote this regional integration that is so important? Well, that is something that we thought about in Panama in a forum of regulators some years ago. And I consider that it is a challenge that is quite big, especially because the Central America region, has been we have a very good integration, but to work with that and the regulations of South America, it still has a lot of work needed. But I see it with the different initiatives that Olade is looking at, with the declarations of the gas integration system that is going to help the whole Southern American system, and probably Central America would also take a look at it. But once we can have a conciliation of regulations, then it will be fruitful for the whole Latin American region. But it is a job that needs to be prioritized, because to try to conciliate these regulations is very hard. They're very different, and so it needs political and technical will in order to be able to do it. So if you'll allow me, Antonio, I just wanted to comment that we think that integration is very important. We talked about it in the previous session as well. I think that this is something that really contributes, but this has to... Someone said we have to run fast in order not to miss the bus, but we have to make sure that we don't get on the wrong bus. I think that it is an important challenge. We've had for some years a process of integration with Ecuador, and it's one thing to be connected and another thing to be integrated. We have a minimal connection there of 100 megawatts that has been used very little. Now between Peru and Ecuador we have the complementary aspect. We are countries that do complement themselves in ordinary situations. Nowadays, this has changed a bit. Ecuador is going through a very big hydric crisis, and so they have access to support them, but due to the capability of the lines, we can't do it. Right now, we are negotiating this topic, but we are trying to broaden this to a line of 500 kilobytes that is going to make the capacity 5 times more in order for it to be more solid. And so we are going to continue on this path and try to continue to work on this with the neighboring countries. I think that that is a good definition compared with connection and integration. With neighboring countries, it's easier in general, and with time we identify how we can complement each other, and so we have the regulations that allow for import and export of energy. What is more challenging is projects that interconnect the countries and how we can complement each other. So I think, of course, technology is important. This new option that we have launched since September this year, it also needs intelligent ways to measure it, because it's going to be more transparent for users as well. And they're going to be able to modulate their use. That's an internal management that they have to do in order to have a convenient consumption. In terms of electromobility, we haven't made progress yet. There are initiatives, but this is because we have an important resource, which is natural gas. we have already turned more than 100,000 vehicles that used oil are now using natural gas. When we began the program, we made 5,000 vehicles a year, and then with the pandemic and the high fuel prices, and then due to war and other external reasons, we are now building 5,000 per month. We are now over 100,000 vehicles. And so this is, the electrical vehicles are sort of delayed. This is a challenge that we're also looking at. And we have also been working on opening up the renewable, non-conventional or renewable energies in order to try to apply that to vehicles. There's some small initiatives in different municipalities. So Agnes, if you'll allow me, I have two questions for you. If you could go deeper into the concept of this subsidy measure, and then having changed the parameter of the paradigm of distributed generate of energy with the different distributing companies, what changes are you seeing in Brazil with the distributing companies to face this change of paradigm? Thank you. The subsidy meter is on the website. It's very easy there to see what is being paid. So we have cross subsidies for public policies, and so in Brazil, we have an account that is called Account of Energy Development, where we collect through the fees of consumers the resources for public policies. And so the budget this year was 33 trillion reales, and 10 trillions were for the renewable sources that are not hydroelectrical. On the other hand, we have, I think, 2 trillion for social tariffs. Also part to equalize the price in certain areas for consumers not to pay more than they should. And so it is a way to inform of what is present in the fee, and all of that is created by law. So the government is the only one that can change those policies. Yes, it's very easy to access. So now regarding the role of distributing companies, I think that the obligations of the distributing companies are really well established in the contracts. And I think that we are at a time of possibilities of change of the contracts, because there is a whole group of distributors that have contracts that are about to end. And so the government is talking about the regulations for the new contracts. And some of the discussions are about the role of the distributing companies, because when part of their market is for distributed energy, or there's this open market as well, there is protection to involuntary exposure, because they have energy for the tenders, but they don't have maybe more demand because the market is not growing more. But if there's many contracts, you can transfer the cost of energy to the consumers, and so the fees are going to increase if they are not consuming the energy. What we also see is that the distributing companies have their own business strategy. We have holdings that distribute energy or commercialization, and so they also contribute to that with the consumers, and that is an issue for regulators. So when we created an area that is dedicated for the energy transition in the agency, the area of the fiscal area is also responsible of accompanying the safety of the market, but also the relationships of the companies, because before we only took a look at the agents, but now we are seeing more complex structures, and we have to see if this is creating issues for other businesses when there is this competition. Perfect, thank you very much. Are there other questions? Yes. Related to what Brazil was saying. Wait a moment, let's give you a mic so that everyone can hear. I have a doubt. Brazil was now talking about this, with this thing of transition and promotion of renewables and all that. Those costs, whether they are for long-term contracts or other types of promotions, sometimes they end up falling on regulated clients, and so they end up being free customers, and there's that migration, not because of the efficiency, but because they don't want to pay those costs. So I was wondering if you could talk more about the mechanisms that regulators have found for that not to happen, so that competition happens due to real efficiency reasons and not to avoid paying associated costs to the installation of that infrastructure. When I talk about associated costs, I'm talking about long-term contracts with prices of other times. Those were the prices that existed in prior years. Nowadays, fortunately, the renewable prices have gone down, but we have this issue of how those costs are diluted, and I cannot just do it with the regulated ones, because that is going to... I was wondering about experiences and all that. That's a very good question, because this is the reality that we live in, but to answer, it's not the regulator that can do that, because if we take a look at the governance of the sector in Brazil, the regulators have to apply what appears in the law. This appears in the law in Brazil, and so the Congress has created the incentives for technologies, and it's a democratic debate that is very important. Right now in Brazil, we are discussing the regulatory framework, talking about hydrogen, fuels, other types of fuels. So when we have subsidies, the regulator can't do that. So what we do is show that it is expensive. It is an issue, but the result is that many consumers are migrating to sort of get away from the costs. So it is a reflection of the regulations that we have in the country. If you allow me to talk about this, in Peru, we have established some places to see if users are regulated or free.
We have a maximum of 200 to be regulated. Up to 2.5 megabytes, they may take the decision. The users can freely decide whether they want to be regulated. And above 2.5, that is mandatory for them to decide. We had some reforms to reduce these 200 kilowatts, to reduce them to 50, to avoid some cost or to save, because the fee, the regular fee, was like in 70, and in markets almost 30, so it was tempting, especially for micro companies, and that was the reason that they provided. But the meaning of this is that they were losing a lot of clients, and there was kind of disclaimer, because the distributor buying to the generator was responsible for that power that was hired. I think that we companies, we need to strengthen it. we need to make sure or to ensure demand. And what Agustin mentioned was electromobility. Electricity companies have decided to have their own electro lines, and there is also a grant by the Ministry of Energy and Mines that is promoting this, and also the support of local governments. So that's why it's important to work with the companies. Okay, thank you very much. We have one last question, and then Lina, you have the floor. So let's hope that it's a short question, by the way. Hello, first of all, I would like to thank the panel. We have you have mentioned the importance of diversifying technologies, but decarbonization will be possible by every megabyte that you save. We need to think about efficiency. In this topic, when it comes to transmission grids, are you taking into account including incentives, digitalization programs that allows you to reduce loss or to improve the quality of the service, so that that saving, in a way, can mean that you will recover cost? So to provide that incentive to grid operators, so that through those savings, they can cover the cost of the improvement. I don't know whether you got my question. Yeah, no problem. Well, in the case of El Salvador, it's a primary effort. We are taking the first steps, but we are asking distribution companies to implement a study of the quality of the grid, so that they can define what kind of infrastructure changes they have to do, and include smart measuring. And that will also imply to have changes in the production models and all that circle of bad habits that we need to correct in order to create a virtuous circle. Also to include the purchase of devices to save energy, changes in electromobility, and introducing that to public transportation. Those are several components and areas we would like to work in, but we are starting with those efforts to move on along those lines. So to get to know the condition of the quality with smart measuring, that is the purpose. Thank you very much. So now we have some minutes. Let's listen to Lina, and then we just wrap it up for today.
Adelante, Lina, te vemos. Ojalá te escuchemos.
Hola, perfecto. ¿Me oyen?
Okay, can you hear me?
Muchas gracias por la invitación y un saludo a todos los que están presentes en el foro. Pues en esta intervención quiero, digamos, como hacer un pequeño resumen de las intervenciones que he oído.
I would like to have a summary of what I've heard from the colleagues in the room. What I see is that regulators are right in the middle of a huge trade-off. On the one hand, we need to implement regulatory changes in a timely manner, with a lot of new technologies that are constantly emerging for the whole chain of services. For instance, batteries, digitalization of smart measures, measurements, electric vehicles that require changes in the regulatory framework
so that investment can take place. But on the other hand, these are complex issues that require complex analysis, as it was mentioned by many of the colleagues in the room. Also, we have the legitimacy of those decisions. And this is an element that is more recent in the energy sector. And I remember a post I read online when they were talking about energy as the topic of the year in Time magazine. They mentioned that energy is something like football. Now everybody is talking about energy transition. Everybody has an opinion on this. We are all experts on the issue. We see that in Latin America, there's no country in which the candidates to elections are not talking about energy transition included in their government plan. So there's a huge tension. The tension about the pace required to act quickly, but at the same time, being able to discuss this topic in a democratic way, including all the interests at play, and with different stakeholders. And these tensions then can be seen in the way that we need to regulate both the bulk market and those markets with a high penetration of non-conventionals, no renewables. We see marginal costs that are equal zero. In Europe, we have even seen negative prices, and the difficulties to be faced by the market. There is a signal of marginal cost equaling zero, but also on the side of the users. So there are marginal costs where the price has reached zero, and we have negative costs.
Una tarifa positiva, entonces allí digamos que la necesidad de poder formular un nuevo mercado con la intervención de nuevas tecnologías.
With the use of new technologies with marginal costs that are zero. It doesn't mean that they are zero. You need to make them profitable, and you need to pay for those in some way. And also the fee structure, it's also funding a number of investments that are difficult to legitimize for the users. Then when it comes to grids, that is also part of these tensions. On the one hand, we have the difficulty of trying to have transmission infrastructure in several of the countries in the region. They all seem to want renewables, to have a reliable and safe system at the lowest cost possible. However, there are difficulties in the construction of infrastructure in the region. There's a difficulty also not only for regulators but also for planners trying to comply with the requirements of demand for renewables non-conventional. And also the digitalization aspects, as my colleague mentioned. So now we have a series of technologies that can optimize all these grids, and these will allow us to basically postpone investment and try to have a more efficient use of the grid. But how can we integrate that? Because for the regulator, that is just expenditure, is not an asset. That's what can be used for remuneration in those fees. So that is represented as a cost. And that expenditure now can be considered a long-term investment for the optimization of the grid. Distribution, exactly the same thing happens. We have the same dilemmas now in distribution in several countries in the continent. We are talking about companies that are still public, but they are managed not from a technical perspective, but a political one, and there are some regional interests that are at play with these companies that face great difficulties to try to finance investment, not only in the expansion of the grid, but also in the traditional assets. And extra difficulties when purchasing new technologies for the digitalization of the processes, electromobility, smart metering, the control of distribution. Our colleague from Brazil mentioned the difficulties they are facing because of the expansion of distribution. And not only about that, because of lack of regulations, but there's also lack of control and regulation of the grid, where distributors in general do not get to increase visibility in the way they control and manage the grid. And the question would be how to include all these new technologies in investment, in fee structure, so that these distribution grids can be built in an optimized way. Without implying that we need to approve all the costs for the distributors, while at the same time seeing a reduction in the fees or a reduction in cost. And lastly, and this is a topic that was presented by our colleague in Peru, the difficulties and challenges in the fee structure. So the fee is the signal to promote efficient consumption, the optimum location, rational consumption of energy. We need to also work on the different time classes, and the fees is something that can be used, that can be very effective from the technical aspects, but at the same time we have the end user that maybe is not interested. And the moment they see an increase in the bills or volatility due to inflation, technological, because of the use of new technologies, they will reject these changes. I believe this panel has been very interesting, where we have presented this trade-off between technical aspects, difficulties produced by new technologies, all these new complex components of the electric system, and the whole chain of service. And on the other hand, this cross-cutting issue of energy that presents additional challenges in areas such as communication, transparency, monitoring, that are imposed on the regulator, and these are additional challenges also for public policies. That's it, and thank you very much for the invitation.
Nuevamente, muchas gracias a...
Thank you again to our distinguished panelists who are joining us today, and our distinguished moderator, and also to the participants. Thank you for your questions. Clearly, we have a lot of challenges ahead of us, lots of work to do. It is a big issue, and here is where integration begins. So thank you very much.
Hola, ¿qué tal? Yo soy uno de los 3 comisionados.